The clatter of dishes and the hum of late-night conversation filled Bella Vista, an upscale bistro nestled in the heart of downtown Seattle. Among the warm amber lighting and exposed brick walls, 26-year-old Maya Chen moved with practiced efficiency, balancing plates of truffle risotto and glasses of vintage wine that cost more than her weekly rent. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders like a heavy coat, she maintained the polite smile that had become second nature after 3 years of serving Seattle's elite. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had arrived at Bella Vista that Tuesday evening, with flour still under her fingernails from her morning shift at the neighborhood bakery. The double shifts had become her reality ever since her younger brother Jake's accident 6 months ago. The medical bills from his spinal surgery continued to pile up on her kitchen table, each envelope a reminder of dreams deferred and sacrifices made. She'd been working 16-hour days, moving from kneading dough at sunrise to serving overpriced appetizers under crystal chandeliers, all to keep Jake in the rehabilitation program that insurance refused to cover. The restaurant buzzed with its usual Tuesday crowd of business executives and socialites, people who treated $100 meals as casual Tuesday dinners. Maya had learned to navigate their world with invisible grace, refilling wine glasses before they emptied and anticipating needs before they were spoken. She'd become expert at being present yet unnoticed, essential yet overlooked. In the corner of the dining room sat a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its ebony surface reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights. The instrument commanded attention even in silence, its presence both elegant and somehow melancholic. Maya found her gaze drifting to it constantly throughout her shifts, her fingers unconsciously moving in muscle memory patterns that hadn't been forgotten despite years of dormancy. The piano had been Mr. Castellano's pride when he'd opened the restaurant 5 years ago, but it had remained untouched for the past 2 years, serving more as an expensive decoration than the musical centerpiece it was meant to be. Maya knew pianos. She'd grown up with them, spent her childhood and teenage years at the bench of her family's modest upright, later graduating to the conservatory's concert grands during her brief stint at the Seattle Institute of Music. She'd been good, really good, with professors who'd spoken of Carnegie Hall and international competitions. But that was before her parents' restaurant failed, before the family's financial collapse, before her father's heart attack that left her mother struggling to keep their small apartment while caring for both her husband and Jake. Music school had been the first casualty of their family crisis. Maya had withdrawn after just 2 semesters, trading Chopin etudes for coffee shop shifts, symphony rehearsals for restaurant service. She'd told herself it was temporary, that she'd return to her studies once things stabilized. That was 4 years ago, and stability had remained as elusive as the musical career she'd once imagined for herself. The evening progressed with its familiar rhythm of controlled chaos. Maya served the Henderson table their usual bottle of Cabernet, smiled through Mrs. Patterson's complaints about the temperature of her soup, and deftly avoided the wandering hands of a tech executive who'd had too much to drink. She moved through the dining room like a dancer who'd forgotten she was performing, her movements fluid and purposeful despite the weight of exhaustion. It was nearing 10 o'clock when Vincent Castellano made his entrance. The owner of Bella Vista was a man who commanded attention without asking for it, his silver hair perfectly styled and his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors with authority. At 52, he'd built a small empire of high-end restaurants across the Pacific Northwest, each one a testament to his belief that dining was theater, and he was both director and star. Vincent had purchased Bella Vista during the height of the city's tech boom, transforming what had been a neighborhood Italian joint into the kind of establishment where reservations were booked months in advance and a single meal could cost more than many people's monthly grocery budgets. He took pride in creating experiences for people who could afford them, in curating perfection for those who expected nothing less. Maya watched him survey his domain from behind the host station, his sharp eyes cataloguing every detail from the angle of the napkins to the positioning of the candles. Vincent Castellano was a perfectionist who'd built his reputation on attention to detail and an unwavering belief that excellence was not negotiable. He treated his restaurants like theatrical productions, and everyone from the sommelier to the busboys had a role to play in his vision. Tonight, Vincent was entertaining a group of investors from Vancouver, potential partners in his planned expansion into British Columbia. Maya recognized the signs of a high-stakes business dinner, the way he'd personally selected their table, the discreet appearance of the restaurant's most expensive bottles, the almost theatrical way he gestured while speaking. These were the kind of evenings that could make or break deals worth millions, and Vincent approached them with the intensity of a conductor leading a symphony. Maya had served Vincent's investor dinners before. She knew to be invisible until needed, to anticipate requests before they were made, to ensure that nothing disrupted the carefully orchestrated atmosphere he created for his guests. She'd learned that on these nights, Vincent's standards rose to almost impossible heights, and his temper, usually kept in check, could flare at the smallest imperfection. As the evening wore on, Maya noticed Vincent's mood darkening. The investors seemed distracted, more interested in their phones than his passionate descriptions of his restaurant concepts. One of them, a stern woman in her 60s, had barely touched her entree and had twice commented that the ambiance lacked something special, something that would truly set Bella Vista apart from the dozens of other upscale establishments vying for attention in the competitive Seattle dining scene. Maya was clearing the adjacent table when she heard Vincent's voice rising slightly, the polished veneer of his hospitality beginning to crack. He was explaining his vision for the Vancouver location, his hands moving expressively as he described the intersection of authentic Italian cuisine and Pacific Northwest sophistication. But Maya could see in his guests' expressions that he was losing them, that whatever magic he'd hoped to weave wasn't taking hold. The piano sat silent in its corner, a beautiful but mute witness to the evening's slowly unfolding disappointment. Maya found herself staring at it again, remembering the weight of keys beneath her fingers, the way music could transform a space and everyone in it. She thought about the conservatory's practice rooms, where she'd spent countless hours learning to make emotions tangible through melody, to tell stories that words couldn't capture. Vincent's frustration was becoming more apparent as the investors grew increasingly restless. Maya could see him searching for something, anything, that might salvage the evening and reignite their interest in his expansion plans. His eyes swept the dining room, looking for inspiration, or perhaps a miracle, and for just a moment, his gaze lingered on the silent piano. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Other diners seemed to sense the tension at Vincent's table, conversations becoming more subdued, the evening's energy deflating like a balloon losing air. Maya continued her work, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, but she could feel the weight of disappointment settling over the room like fog rolling in from Puget Sound. She'd seen Vincent like this before, had witnessed the way his perfectionist nature could turn triumph into torment when things didn't unfold according to his exacting standards. But tonight felt different, more consequential. Maya could sense that this wasn't just about one difficult dinner, but about something larger, something that represented Vincent's vision for his future and the legacy he hoped to build. As she carried a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen, Maya caught fragments of conversation from the investors' table. Words like atmosphere, memorable, and distinctive floated through the dining room's ambient noise. The stern woman was speaking now, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. She was explaining what she looked for in restaurant investments, the intangible qualities that transformed a good establishment into an exceptional one. Maya paused near the kitchen doors, not quite eavesdropping but unable to avoid hearing the woman's critique. She spoke of restaurants in Paris where live music created magic, of establishments in New York where the atmosphere was so compelling that guests forgot to look at their phones, of the importance of creating experiences that lingered in memory long after the last bite was savored. The piano seemed to pulse with possibility in Maya's peripheral vision, its silence suddenly feeling less like peace and more like missed opportunity. She thought about Jake, lying in his hospital bed, about the stack of unpaid bills waiting at home, about the music that lived inside her but had no outlet. She thought about the years she'd spent serving other people's dreams while her own gathered dust like sheet music left unopened on a shelf. Vincent's voice had taken on a strained quality that Maya recognized as barely controlled desperation. He was working harder now, his natural charisma edged with something that resembled pleading. The investors remained politely engaged, but increasingly detached, their body language suggesting that their decision had already been made, and it wasn't the one Vincent hoped for. Maya finished loading her tray and headed back into the dining room, the familiar weight of plates and glasses grounding her in the present moment. But as she moved between tables, her eyes kept returning to the piano, to Vincent's increasingly frantic attempts to salvage his evening, to the opportunity that sat silent and unused in the corner of the room. The evening was reaching its crescendo, though not the one Vincent had orchestrated. Maya could see the investors beginning to gather their things, the subtle signs that indicated a business dinner was drawing to its close. Vincent's face had taken on the pallor of a man watching his dreams slip away, his carefully constructed evening crumbling, despite his best efforts to hold it together. It was then that Vincent's frustration finally boiled over. The stern investor had just made another comment about the restaurant's atmosphere, something about the space feeling nice but not special, when Vincent's composure finally cracked. His voice, usually controlled and measured, rose sharply above the dining room's ambient noise, cutting through conversations and drawing every eye in the room. "You want something special?" Vincent's voice carried across the restaurant, his Italian accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions heightened. "You want atmosphere, you want memorable." He gestured broadly at the dining room, at the carefully curated art, at the expensive fixtures, at the piano that sat silent in its corner. "I've given you the finest cuisine, the best wine service that rivals any establishment in the city, and still you sit there talking about what's missing." The restaurant had gone quiet, other diners turning to witness Vincent's uncharacteristic outburst. Maya felt her heart rate quicken as she watched her normally composed employer lose control in front of the very people he'd hoped to impress. She'd never seen him like this, raw and desperate and completely exposed. Vincent's eyes swept the room, landing on Maya as she stood frozen near table 12, a water pitcher in her hands. For a moment, their gazes met across the suddenly silent dining room, and Maya saw something in his expression that surprised her.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It wasn't just anger or disappointment, but genuine pain, the kind that comes from watching something you've built with love and dedication be dismissed as inadequate. "You know what?" Vincent continued, his voice carrying a bitter edge that Maya had never heard before. "You want to know what this place is missing? It's missing people who understand what we're trying to create here. It's missing guests who appreciate excellence instead of looking for reasons to tear it down." The investors sat in uncomfortable silence, the stern woman's face set in disapproval. Maya could see other staff members peering out from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion but uncertain whether to intervene. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Vincent turned his attention back to his guests, but his voice had taken on a different quality now, sharp with frustration and disappointment. "You sit there complaining about atmosphere and ambience, but what have you contributed to this evening except criticism and disengagement? You check your phones during my presentation, barely touch the food my chef spent hours preparing, and then have the audacity to tell me my restaurant lacks soul." Maya felt the water pitcher trembling in her hands as she watched the scene unfold. She could see Vincent's career, his reputation, his dreams for expansion all crumbling in real time. The investors were gathering their coats now, the stern woman's expression suggesting that this outburst had sealed their decision definitively. "You want soul?" Vincent's voice cracked slightly as he gestured toward the piano. That piano has been sitting in this corner for 2 years because no one, not one person in this city, has the talent or the passion to bring it to life. Everyone's mediocre now, content with background music and elevator melodies. Real artistry, real soul, that's extinct. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a stirring that she'd kept buried under years of exhaustion and pragmatic survival. Vincent's words weren't just about the piano, or the restaurant, or even the failed business dinner. They were about the death of dreams, the compromise of artistic vision, the slow erosion of beauty in a world that had forgotten how to appreciate it. The investors were standing now, the stern woman's face set in polite but firm disapproval. "Castellano," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like ice, "I think we've heard enough for one evening. We'll be in touch." Maya watched Vincent's face crumble as the investors gathered their things and prepared to leave. His outburst had cost him everything he'd worked toward, had destroyed months of careful negotiation and planning. The other diners were beginning to resume their conversations, but the atmosphere remained charged, electric with the aftermath of witnessed humiliation. Vincent slumped into his chair, his head in his hands, the fight gone out of him as completely as air from a punctured balloon. Maya could see his shoulders shaking slightly, whether from anger or despair she couldn't tell. The piano continued its silent vigil in the corner, beautiful and mute and somehow accusatory in its unused perfection. It was in that moment, watching Vincent's dreams dissolve and feeling the weight of her own deferred aspirations, that Maya felt something crystallize inside her. She thought about Jake in his hospital bed, about the bills on her kitchen table, about the music that lived in her fingertips but had no voice. She thought about Vincent's words, about soul and artistry, and the courage to be more than mediocre. Maya set down her water pitcher and began walking toward the piano, her feet moving almost independently of conscious thought. She could feel eyes turning toward her, conversations pausing, the entire restaurant's attention shifting in her direction. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her steps remained steady, purposeful, carrying her toward the instrument that had called to her every night for 3 years. Vincent looked up as she approached, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. "Maya, what are you doing?" Maya didn't answer immediately. She reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, her hands resting on the closed keyboard cover. The room had gone quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, expectant rather than tense. "You said no one had the talent to bring it to life," Maya said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed restaurant. "You said real artistry was extinct." Vincent stared at her, his confusion deepening. "I don't understand." Maya lifted the keyboard cover, revealing the pristine keys that hadn't been touched in months. The black and white surfaces seemed to gleam under the restaurant's warm lighting, inviting and intimidating in equal measure. "Maybe," Maya said, settling onto the bench and adjusting its height with muscle memory that hadn't faded despite years of disuse, "you just haven't been looking in the right places." The restaurant held its breath as Maya placed her hands above the keys, her fingers remembering their positions like a language she'd never truly forgotten. Vincent stared at her in shock, his tear-stained face reflecting a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of possibility beneath her fingertips. She thought about Jake, about Vincent's shattered dreams, about the investors walking away, about all the music she'd kept locked inside herself for years. She thought about what it meant to have soul, to create something beautiful in a world that had forgotten how to stop and listen. And then in the hushed silence of Bella Vista, with a room full of strangers watching and her employer's career hanging in the balance, Maya began to play. The first notes that flowed from the Steinway were soft, almost tentative, like the opening lines of a conversation between old friends who hadn't spoken in years. Maya had chosen Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that had always felt like coming home to her, its flowing melody both melancholic and hopeful. Her fingers found their places on the keys as if no time had passed at all, muscle memory and emotional connection bridging the years of silence. The piano's voice filled the restaurant with a richness that seemed to transform the very air, each note hanging in space before blending seamlessly with the next. Maya could feel the tension in the room beginning to shift, conversations dying away not from awkwardness now, but from genuine captivation. The melody wrapped around the diners like silk, drawing them into a shared experience that none of them had expected. Maya's eyes remained closed as she played, her consciousness flowing entirely into the music. She could feel the years of suppressed artistry pouring out through her fingertips, all the emotions she'd kept buried under exhaustion and responsibility, finding their voice in Debussy's haunting melody. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing, its voice warm and resonant, filling corners of the restaurant that had been silent for too long. As the piece progressed, Maya allowed herself to add subtle variations, small personal touches that made the familiar melody uniquely hers. A gentle emphasis here, a slight pause there, moments where she let the music breathe and speak for itself. This wasn't just technical proficiency, this was storytelling, the kind of musical communication that she'd spent years learning to master before life forced her to set it aside. Maya could sense the restaurant around her without opening her eyes, could feel the quality of attention that only comes when something truly special is happening. Servers had stopped moving between tables, their trays forgotten as they stood transfixed by the unexpected concert unfolding before them. Diners sat with forks halfway to their mouths, wine glasses paused at their lips, all other thoughts suspended in the presence of genuine artistry. Vincent remained in his chair, but Maya could feel his attention like a weight, his shock and disbelief palpable even from across the room. The investors who had been preparing to leave stood frozen near their table, their departure plans forgotten as the music washed over them with undeniable beauty. As Clair de Lune drew to its gentle close, Maya felt a profound sense of completion, as if a part of herself that had been missing for years had suddenly been restored. The final notes hung in the air like stars, beautiful and bright and slowly fading into memory. The silence that followed wasn't empty but full, pregnant with the kind of awe that follows truly transcendent moments. Maya opened her eyes and immediately felt the weight of dozens of gazes upon her. The restaurant was completely still, every person present caught in the spell of what they'd just witnessed. She could see faces reflecting wonder, surprise, and something that looked like hunger, as if they'd just remembered something they'd forgotten they were missing. But it was Vincent's expression that caught and held her attention. Her employer sat staring at her with tears streaming down his face, his mouth slightly open in amazement. The frustration and disappointment that had marked his features just minutes before had been replaced by something else entirely, something that looked like recognition, like the moment when a long-lost memory suddenly becomes clear. Maya stood from the bench slowly, her legs somewhat unsteady after the intensity of the performance. The silence stretched on, no one seeming to want to be the first to break the spell with applause or words. She could feel her heart racing, adrenaline coursing through her system as the magnitude of what had just happened began to settle in. It was the stern investor who finally spoke, her voice soft and wondering. "My God," she whispered, "where did that come from?" Maya looked across the room at the woman who had been so critical just minutes before, whose dismissal had triggered Vincent's outburst and the evening's dramatic turn. The investor's face had been transformed, the harsh lines of judgment softened into something approaching reverence. "I studied at the Seattle Institute," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed restaurant.
Before life got in the way. Vincent rose from his chair slowly, like a man emerging from a dream. He walked toward Maya with hesitant steps, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he reached the piano, he stood looking at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. 3 years, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You've been here for 3 years and I never knew. How did I never know?"
Maya felt a flush of heat in her cheeks, suddenly aware of her server's uniform, of her tired appearance, of how she must look to these people who lived in a world where talent was expected to announce itself with credentials and connections. "You never asked," she said simply, "and I never had a reason to tell you. Music doesn't pay Jake's medical bills." The mention of her brother brought reality flooding back, reminding Maya of all the reasons she'd set music aside in the first place. She could feel the spell of the moment beginning to fracture, the practical world reasserting itself over the magical one she'd just created. But Vincent wasn't letting go so easily. "Jake, your brother?" Maya nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional intensity of the past few minutes. "He was in an accident. Spinal surgery. The rehabilitation isn't covered by insurance, and without it," she let the sentence trail off, not wanting to burden these strangers with the full weight of her family's struggles. The stern investor stepped forward, her expression completely changed from the cold criticism of earlier in the evening. "That was remarkable," she said, extending her hand to Maya. "I'm Catherine Morrison. I've been involved in restaurant investment for 20 years, and I've never experienced anything like what you just did." Maya shook the offered hand, still feeling somewhat disconnected from reality. "It was just one piece. I'm out of practice." "Out of practice?" Catherine's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "If that was you out of practice, I can't imagine what you'd sound like with preparation." She turned to Vincent, her entire demeanor toward him transformed. "This is what I was talking about earlier. This is soul. This is what makes a restaurant memorable." Vincent nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. "Why didn't you tell me you could play?" Maya shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious under the intense scrutiny of everyone in the restaurant. "When would I have told you? During my interview, when you asked about my ability to balance multiple plates. During staff meetings about wine pairings. Music felt like it belonged to a different life. But it doesn't," Vincent said with growing intensity. "It belongs to this life, to this moment, to this restaurant." He gestured around the dining room, where other diners were beginning to approach, drawn by curiosity and the lingering magic of Maya's performance. A well-dressed couple from a nearby table had risen and were walking toward them, the woman's eyes bright with excitement. "Excuse me," she said to Maya, "but that was absolutely beautiful. Are you the restaurant's pianist?" Maya shook her head, acutely aware of her server's apron and the lingering smell of kitchen grease on her uniform. "No, I'm just a waitress. I was just creating magic." Vincent interrupted, his voice gaining strength and certainty. "Just proving that everything I've been trying to build here, everything I've been searching for, has been right in front of me all along." More diners were gathering now, drawn by the commotion and the lingering atmosphere of something extraordinary having occurred. Maya could hear whispered conversations, fragments of praise and amazement, questions about when she'd be playing again. The attention felt overwhelming, wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. Catherine Morrison was speaking to Vincent now, her voice animated with renewed interest. "This changes everything," she was saying. "A restaurant with live music of this caliber, with this level of artistry, this isn't just dining, it's an experience. This is what sets a place apart." Maya felt dizzy as she listened to Catherine's words, to Vincent's growing excitement, to the conversations swirling around her. Everything was happening so fast, the careful boundaries of her life shifting and blurring in ways she hadn't prepared for. "I need to get back to work," Maya said suddenly, looking around at the tables that needed clearing, the guests who were still waiting for their checks. "People are waiting for their bills." But Vincent caught her arm gently as she started to walk away. "Maya, wait, we need to talk. This evening, what just happened, it changes things." Maya looked at him, seeing hope and possibility blazing in his eyes, feeling the weight of expectations that she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. She thought about Jake, about the bills, about the life she'd carefully constructed around survival rather than dreams. "Mr. Castellano," she said quietly, "I appreciate what you're feeling right now, but I can't afford to get carried away. I have responsibilities, obligations. Music is beautiful, but it doesn't pay for medical treatments. Vincent's expression softened with understanding, but his determination didn't waver. What if it could? What if there was a way for your music to help Jake, to help your family, to help this restaurant become everything I've dreamed it could be? Maya felt her heart skip, dangerous hope beginning to flutter in her chest, despite her attempts to keep it grounded. What do you mean? Catherine Morrison stepped forward, her investor's mind clearly working. I mean that what you just did in there, that level of artistry, that's not just entertainment, that's a draw. That's the kind of experience that gets written about in magazines, that brings people from across the city, that creates a reputation. Vincent nodded eagerly. Maya, I've been trying to create something special here for 5 years. Tonight, in 5 minutes, you showed me what I've been missing. You gave this place soul. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, all of them bright with excitement and possibility, all of them seeing something in her that she'd almost forgotten existed. She thought about the piano sitting silent for 2 years, waiting for someone to give it voice. She thought about Vincent's tears, about Catherine's transformed expression, about the magic that had filled the restaurant when music returned to its corners. But she also thought about Jake, about the stack of bills at home, about the reality of a world where dreams didn't always pay the rent. The two worlds, the practical and the magical, seemed to be pulling her in opposite directions, demanding a choice she wasn't sure she was ready to make. I don't know, Maya said finally, her voice small in the face of such overwhelming possibility. This is all happening so fast. I need time to think. Vincent's face fell slightly, but he nodded with understanding. Of course, this is a lot to process. But Maya, promise me you'll think about it. Promise me you won't let fear keep you from exploring what could be. Maya looked at him, at Catherine, at all the expectant faces around her, and felt the weight of a moment that could change everything. She thought about the music that lived in her fingertips, about the dreams she'd set aside, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to reclaim the life she'd thought was lost forever. I'll think about it, she said softly, and even as the words left her lips, she could feel the future beginning to reshape itself around the promise they contained. Maya barely slept that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the studio apartment she shared with Jake, staring at the ceiling, while her mind replayed every moment of the evening. The feel of the keys beneath her fingers lingered like a phantom sensation, and she could still hear the echo of applause in her ears. Jake's breathing from the hospital bed they'd moved into the living room provided a steady rhythm to her racing thoughts. Her brother had been asleep when she'd arrived home after midnight, exhausted from another grueling day of physical therapy. Maya had stood in the doorway watching him, noting how thin he'd become since the accident, how young he looked despite being 24. The stack of medical bills on the kitchen table seemed to loom larger in the darkness, each envelope a reminder of the mountain of debt that no amount of restaurant tips could ever conquer. Maya had made herself a cup of tea with hands that still trembled slightly from the evening's intensity. She'd sat at their tiny kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid invoices and insurance denial letters, trying to process what Vincent and Catherine Morrison had suggested. The possibility that her music could somehow solve their financial crisis felt too good to be true, like a fairy tale that belonged in someone else's life. But she couldn't shake the memory of Vincent's tears, the genuine emotion in his voice when he'd spoken about soul and artistry. She'd never seen her normally composed employer so raw, so desperate, so human. The transformation in Catherine Morrison's expression had been equally startling, the way criticism had melted into reverence the moment music filled the space between them. Maya had eventually fallen into a restless sleep just before dawn, her dreams filled with piano keys that stretched endlessly in both directions and crowds of faceless people whose approval felt both intoxicating and terrifying. She'd awakened to her alarm at 5:30, her body protesting another short night, her mind still churning with questions and possibilities. The morning shift at Grandma's bakery passed in a blur of muscle memory and distracted thoughts. Maya mixed dough and shaped croissants while replaying every conversation from the previous evening, analyzing each word and gesture for hidden meanings. Her co-worker Sarah noticed her unusual quietness but attributed it to typical exhaustion, offering to handle the more demanding customers while Maya worked in the relative peace of the preparation area. It wasn't until she was walking to Bella Vista for her evening shift that Maya realized she'd spent the entire day unconsciously humming fragments of Debussy, her fingers tapping complex rhythms against her thighs as she moved through the city streets. The music that had been dormant for so long seemed to have awakened with a vengeance, demanding attention after years of neglect. Maya arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early, hoping to speak with Vincent before the evening service began. She found him in his office, hunched over spreadsheets with an expression of intense concentration. The confident businessman from the previous evening had been replaced by someone who looked older, more vulnerable, surrounded by the paperwork that represented his struggling expansion plans. Vincent looked up when Maya knocked on the open door, and she saw something flicker in his expression, a mixture of hope and uncertainty that hadn't been there in all her previous interactions with him. He gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk, pushing aside financial documents that she couldn't help but notice were marked with red ink and declining numbers. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," Vincent said quietly, his usual commanding presence subdued in the morning light streaming through his office window. Maya settled into the chair, still wearing her bakery apron over street clothes that smelled faintly of yeast and flour. "I always come back. I need this job." "That's not what I meant." Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intensity he'd shown the previous evening. "After what happened last night, after what you shared with us, I thought you might decide to find somewhere that appreciated your talents from the beginning." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Castellano, I appreciate what you're feeling, but let's be realistic. One performance doesn't change the fact that I'm a waitress with bills to pay. I can't afford to chase dreams that might not lead anywhere." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk in a rhythm that reminded Maya of her own unconscious musical gestures. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent the night wrestling with difficult decisions. What if they could lead somewhere? What if there was a concrete opportunity, not just empty promises and wishful thinking? Maya felt her heart skip, but she forced herself to remain cautious. What kind of opportunity? Vincent pulled out a folder from beneath the financial documents, his movements deliberate and careful. "Catherine Morrison called me this morning. She wants to meet with both of us tomorrow afternoon. She's prepared to offer backing for my expansion plans, but with conditions." "What conditions?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "She wants live music to be a central feature of the new Vancouver location. Professional quality performances, not just background ambiance. She believes that what happened last night could be replicated, could become a signature experience that would set our restaurants apart from every other upscale establishment in the Pacific Northwest." Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever her two worlds, the practical and the artistic, threatened to collide. "And she wants me to be that performer." Vincent nodded slowly. "She's offering a contract that would make you our musical director. A salary that would be triple what you make from both your current jobs combined, plus performance bonuses, plus full health coverage for you and Jake." The numbers hit Maya like a physical blow. Triple her current income would not only cover Jake's medical expenses, but would provide the kind of financial security she'd never imagined possible. Health coverage would eliminate the constant anxiety about insurance denials and coverage gaps that kept her awake at night.
But the practical benefits, as overwhelming as they were, weren't what made Maya's hands tremble as she sat in Vincent's office. It was the possibility of returning to music, of making it the center of her life again, of reclaiming the identity she'd thought was lost forever. There would be conditions, Vincent continued, his voice growing more confident as he outlined the proposal. You'd need to develop a repertoire that could sustain regular performances, classical pieces, but also contemporary arrangements, maybe some original compositions if you're interested. Catherine wants versatility, the ability to adapt to different audiences and occasions. Maya thought about her years at the conservatory, about the range of music she'd studied and performed. The classical foundation was solid, but she'd also spent countless hours exploring jazz standards, contemporary pieces, even some experimental compositions that had challenged her technical abilities and musical understanding. The Vancouver location would open in 6 months, Vincent said. That would give us time to establish the concept here at Bella Vista, to work out the logistics, to build your confidence and our marketing approach. Catherine wants to see regular performances starting next week. Next week. The timeline felt impossibly fast, like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. Maya thought about her morning shift at the bakery, about the routine that had defined her life for the past 3 years. The idea of leaving that security, even for something that promised so much more, felt terrifying.
I need to think about this, Maya said, though even as she spoke, she could feel herself being pulled toward a decision she'd already made without consciously acknowledging it. Vincent leaned forward, his expression earnest. Maya, I know this is overwhelming. I know it's asking you to take a leap of faith. But what happened last night, that wasn't just entertainment. That was transformation. You transformed that room, those people, that entire evening. You have a gift that deserves to be shared. Maya stood up from her chair, needing movement to process the magnitude of what was being offered. She walked to Vincent's office window, looking out at the Seattle street below, where ordinary people were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that someone just a few floors above was contemplating a decision that could change everything. What about the restaurant? The regular service? Maya asked, grasping for practical concerns that might anchor her spinning thoughts. We'd restructure everything around the music, Vincent replied immediately. Dinner service would be designed to complement the performances, specific time slots, premium pricing for music nights, a completely different approach to how we think about the dining experience. Maya turned back to face him, seeing in his expression the same desperate hope she'd witnessed the night before. This wasn't just about her opportunity, she realized. This was Vincent's chance to salvage his expansion plans, to create something that would justify Catherine Morrison's investment and belief. What if I'm not good enough? Maya asked quietly. What if last night was just adrenaline and luck? What if I try to perform regularly and discover that I've lost more than I thought? Vincent stood up from his desk, moving to join her at the window. Do you really believe that? After feeling what you felt last night, after seeing how you affected everyone in that room, do you really think it was just luck? Maya remembered the sensation of the music flowing through her, the way years of training had reasserted themselves the moment her fingers touched the keys. She thought about the audience's reaction, the silence that had followed her performance, the tears on Vincent's face. No, she said softly. I don't think it was luck. Then what are you really afraid of? The question hung in the air between them, and Maya found herself confronting fears she'd buried so deeply, she'd almost forgotten they existed. She was afraid of failure, certainly, but more than that, she was afraid of success. She was afraid of wanting something so desperately and then losing it again. She was afraid of being responsible for Vincent's dreams as well as her own, afraid of disappointing people who believed in her more than she believed in herself. I'm afraid of hoping, Maya said finally, the honesty surprising her with its simplicity. Vincent nodded with understanding. Hope is terrifying. It makes us vulnerable. But Maya, look around. He gestured toward the financial documents on his desk, toward the view of the competitive city below. What's the alternative? We can stay safe, keep our expectations low, and guarantee that nothing extraordinary will ever happen. Or we can take the risk that might lead to everything we've dreamed of. Maya thought about Jake, about the limitations his accident had imposed on both their lives. She thought about the dreams she'd deferred and the passion she'd suppressed. She thought about the magic that had filled Bella Vista the previous evening and the possibility that it could happen again, could become a regular part of her existence rather than a single moment of unexpected beauty. I'll need to talk to Jake, Maya said finally. This affects both of us. If I'm going to make this change, he needs to understand what it means. Vincent's face lit up with barely contained excitement. Does that mean you're considering it seriously? Maya looked at him, at the hope in his expression, at the possibilities spreading out before her like an uncharted map. She thought about the conversation with Catherine Morrison, about salaries and health coverage, and the chance to build something extraordinary. She thought about music returning to the center of her world, about audiences hanging on every note, about the profound satisfaction of creating beauty in a world that desperately needed it. Yes, she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. I'm considering it seriously. The rest of Maya's shift passed in a dreamlike haze. She served tables and cleared plates while her mind wrestled with the magnitude of the decision ahead of her. Vincent had given her Catherine Morrison's contact information and arranged for the three of them to meet the following afternoon to discuss specific terms and expectations. Maya found herself looking at the piano differently now, seeing it not as a beautiful but silent decoration, but as a potential partner, a tool that could reshape her entire existence. During quiet moments between customers, she caught herself studying the instrument, mentally cataloging the pieces she could perform, the repertoire she'd need to develop, the skills she'd need to rebuild and strengthen. Several customers from the previous evening returned, clearly hoping for another impromptu performance. Maya could see recognition in their eyes, expectation in their body language. Word was already spreading through Seattle's dining community about the waitress who'd surprised everyone with her extraordinary musical abilities. The attention felt both flattering and overwhelming, a preview of what life might be like if she accepted Vincent's offer. Maya left Bella Vista that evening, with her mind churning, her practical nature warring with artistic impulses she'd tried to suppress for years. The walk home felt longer than usual, each step carrying her closer to a conversation with Jake that would determine the course of both their futures. She found her brother in their living room, working through prescribed exercises with the physical therapist who came to their apartment 3 times a week. Jake's progress had been steady but slow, his determination to regain full mobility driving him through painful sessions that left him exhausted but hopeful. Maya waited until the therapist had left before approaching the conversation she'd been rehearsing all day. Jake was stretched out on his hospital bed, his face flushed from exertion, his expression peaceful in the way that followed productive therapy sessions. "How was work?" Jake asked, though Maya could tell from his tone that he sensed something significant in her demeanor. Maya pulled up a chair beside his bed, trying to organize thoughts that felt too large and complex for ordinary conversation. "Something happened last night, something that might change things for us." Jake's expression sharpened with attention. Despite their 4-year age difference, he'd always been perceptive about Maya's emotional states, able to read subtleties that escaped most people. The accident had only heightened his sensitivity to the moods and concerns of those around him. "What kind of something?" Jake asked, shifting carefully to face her more directly. Maya told him about the previous evening, about Vincent's outburst and her impulsive decision to play the piano. She described Catherine Morrison's reaction, Vincent's offer, the possibility of a completely different future built around music rather than survival. Jake listened without interruption, his expression cycling through surprise, excitement and concern as Maya outlined the opportunity and its implications. When she finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd told him with the same careful consideration he brought to his physical therapy goals. Maya could see him weighing the potential benefits against the risks, analyzing the practical implications of such a dramatic change in their circumstances. "Triple your current income?" Jake asked finally, focusing first on the financial aspects that had dominated their lives for so long. Maya nodded. "Plus health coverage that would eliminate most of our insurance worries. The medical bills would become manageable instead of impossible." Jake's expression softened with something that looked like relief. Maya realized how much of the family's financial stress he'd been carrying, how guilty he felt about the expenses his accident had generated. The possibility of eliminating that burden clearly affected him as much as it did her. "But that's not why you want to do it," Jake observed, demonstrating the insight that had always made him an excellent brother despite his younger age. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "No, it's not. Jake, when I played last night, for the first time in years I felt like myself again. Not just the person who takes care of everyone else, but the musician I used to be, the person who could create something beautiful." Jake reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "I remember that person. I missed her." The simple statement broke through Maya's remaining reservations, acknowledging a loss that neither of them had ever directly discussed. In focusing so intensely on survival and responsibility, Maya had gradually erased parts of herself that Jake remembered and valued. "I'm scared," Maya admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail and we end up worse off than before? What if I let Vincent down, or disappoint audiences, or discover that my abilities aren't as strong as everyone thinks they are?" Jake squeezed her hand tighter. "Maya, do you remember when you were preparing for your conservatory auditions? You practiced for hours every day, but the night before the audition, you came to my room crying because you were convinced you weren't ready, that you'd embarrass yourself, that you'd wasted everyone's time." Maya remembered that night. The terror that had consumed her despite months of preparation, the certainty that she would fail at the most important moment of her musical career. "And then you played beautifully," Jake continued. "You not only got accepted, you got scholarship offers. Your fear didn't predict your failure, it just showed how much the outcome mattered to you." Maya realized that Jake was right, that her current anxiety might be less about realistic assessment of her abilities and more about the magnitude of what was at stake. The very fact that she was so afraid might indicate how important this opportunity was, how much she'd regret not taking the risk. "There's something else," Maya said quietly. "If this works, if the Vancouver location succeeds, I'd probably have to move there eventually. It would mean leaving Seattle, leaving this apartment, changing everything about our life here." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of such a move. Maya could see him thinking about his medical team, his physical therapist, the support network they'd built in Seattle over the past 6 months. "Would I come with you?" Jake asked. "Of course," Maya said immediately. "We're a team. We've always been a team. I wouldn't consider any opportunity that didn't include both of us." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his face with genuine joy. "Then I think you should do it. I think you should take the risk and see what happens. Even if it doesn't work out perfectly, even if there are challenges we can't anticipate, at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we didn't let fear keep us from exploring something that could be amazing." Maya felt a rush of emotion at Jake's support, at his willingness to embrace uncertainty for the sake of her dreams. She'd been so focused on being the responsible older sister, the caretaker and provider, that she'd forgotten Jake was also an adult who could participate in major decisions rather than simply being protected from them. "Are you sure?" Maya asked. "This would affect your treatment, your therapy schedule, everything we've built here." Jake's expression grew more serious. "Maya, you've sacrificed everything for my recovery. You've worked yourself to exhaustion, given up your dreams, put your life on hold to take care of me. If there's a chance for you to reclaim those dreams while also solving our financial problems, then I want you to take it. I need you to take it." Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she realized how much Jake understood about her sacrifices, how much he wanted her to have the chance to be more than just his caretaker. His support felt like permission she hadn't known she needed, validation that choosing her dreams wasn't selfish but necessary. "I love you," Maya said, leaning over to hug him carefully around his still healing injuries. "I love you too," Jake replied. "And I can't wait to watch you play piano in a real concert setting instead of just humming in the kitchen." Maya spent the rest of the evening researching Catherine Morrison's investment company, reading about successful restaurant partnerships, and making lists of classical pieces she could potentially perform. The practical part of her mind was already shifting into planning mode, organizing the steps she'd need to take to rebuild her performance skills and develop a professional repertoire. But beyond the logistics and preparations, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about her future. For the first time since Jake's accident, she was looking forward to tomorrow not just as another day to survive, but as a step towards something extraordinary. That night, as Jake slept peacefully in his hospital bed and the Seattle rain drummed against their apartment windows, Maya sat at their small kitchen table with a notebook and pen, writing down every piece of music she could remember loving, every technique she wanted to remaster, every dream she'd thought was impossible, but might actually be within reach. The meeting with Catherine Morrison was scheduled for 2 o'clock the following afternoon, and Maya knew that by the end of that conversation, her life would be forever changed. Whether that change led to success or disappointment remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, Maya was ready to find out. She fell asleep that night with Chopin's nocturnes playing in her head, her fingers moving against her blankets in unconscious practice, her dreams filled with concert halls and standing ovations, and the profound satisfaction of sharing music with people who truly wanted to listen. Maya arrived at the downtown office building 15 minutes early, her hands slightly damp with nervous perspiration despite the cool Seattle afternoon. She'd chosen her best dress, a simple black number she'd worn to Jake's high school graduation 3 years ago, and had spent extra time on her appearance, wanting to project professionalism despite her lack of experience in business negotiations. Catherine Morrison's investment firm occupied the entire 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay. Maya felt intimidated by the marble lobby, the expensive artwork, and the receptionist whose manicured nails probably cost more than Maya's monthly grocery budget. Everything about the environment screamed success and sophistication, making Maya acutely aware of her own modest background. Vincent arrived moments after Maya, looking more polished and confident than she'd ever seen him. His suit was perfectly tailored, his demeanor that of a man who belonged in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. Maya realized she'd never seen him outside the context of the restaurant, where his authority came from familiarity with his own domain. Here, surrounded by the trappings of serious money, he seemed to expand into a larger version of himself. Catherine Morrison's office was a study in understated luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the city and Puget Sound beyond. The furniture was modern but warm, expensive but not ostentatious. Catherine herself appeared younger than Maya had expected, perhaps mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair and an energy that filled the room. Maya took a seat at the conference table, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The previous night's research had revealed Catherine's impressive track record of successful restaurant investments across the Pacific Northwest, but also her reputation for being demanding and detail-oriented. This wasn't someone who made decisions based on sentiment or single impressive moments. Catherine began the meeting by outlining her vision for upscale dining experiences that went beyond mere food service. She spoke about creating destinations, places that became part of people's special memories rather than just locations for convenient meals. Her investment strategy focused on restaurants that could differentiate themselves in increasingly competitive markets. What happened at Bella Vista 2 nights ago, Catherine said, her attention focused primarily on Maya, represented exactly the kind of unique value proposition I look for. It wasn't just entertainment, it was transformation. You created an atmosphere that elevated everyone's experience. Maya felt herself blushing at the praise, but also recognized the weight of expectation in Catherine's words. This wasn't just about her musical ability, but about her capacity to consistently deliver something special, to be reliable rather than merely talented. Vincent leaned forward in his chair, his business instincts engaged. "Catherine, we've been discussing how to integrate live music into our regular service model. Maya has incredible range and the technical skills to adapt to different audiences and occasions." Catherine nodded, but her eyes remained on Maya. "Tell me about your training. I know you studied at the Seattle Institute, but I want to understand the depth of your preparation, your repertoire, your comfort level with different musical styles." Maya took a deep breath, forcing herself to speak with the confidence her abilities deserved. She described her years at the conservatory, the range of composers and periods she'd studied, her experience with both classical and contemporary pieces. She mentioned her facility with improvisation, her ability to read chord charts and adapt arrangements, her experience performing for different types of audiences during her student years. Catherine listened intently, occasionally asking specific questions about particular composers or techniques. Maya realized this wasn't casual conversation, but a serious assessment of her qualifications, and she found herself relaxing as she talked about music, the topic she understood better than any other. "Vincent has shared some preliminary thoughts about performance schedules and pricing structures," Catherine continued. "But I want to hear your perspective on what would work practically. How many nights per week could you realistically perform at a professional level? What kind of repertoire would you need to develop to avoid repetition for regular customers?" Maya had spent the previous evening thinking about exactly these questions. "I'd recommend starting with 3 nights per week, building to 4 or 5 as we establish the program and I develop a larger repertoire. Each performance could be approximately 90 minutes, with a brief intermission, allowing for normal dinner service while creating dedicated music periods." She outlined her ideas for themed evenings, classical nights featuring complete sonatas or concertos, jazz standards evenings that would appeal to different demographics, contemporary arrangements that could bridge classical training with popular appeal. Maya surprised herself with the thoroughness of her planning, realizing that her years of practical experience in food service had given her insights into customer preferences and operational logistics. Catherine made notes as Maya spoke, her expression growing more interested as the conversation progressed. "What about original compositions? Do you write music as well as perform it?" Maya hesitated slightly. "I've written some pieces mostly during my student years. Nothing professionally published, but I have experience with composition and arrangement. I could develop original material if that would add value to the program." "It absolutely would," Catherine replied immediately. "Original music becomes intellectual property, something that belongs uniquely to our restaurants. It creates brand identity in ways that performing standard repertoire cannot." Vincent looked pleased with the direction of the conversation. "Maya, you never mentioned that you composed music. What kind of pieces have you written?" Maya felt exposed discussing her most personal creative work, the pieces she'd written during her conservatory years when she'd imagined a career filled with original expression, mostly piano solos, some chamber pieces for small ensembles. "I was working on a piano concerto when I left school, though I never finished it." Catherine's eyes lit up with interest. "A piano concerto? That's ambitious work. What inspired you to attempt such a complex form?" Maya thought back to those intense months when she'd been consumed with the idea of creating something substantial, a piece that would showcase not just her technical abilities but her musical voice. "I wanted to write music that told a story about perseverance, about finding beauty in difficult circumstances. I'd grown up watching my parents struggle with their restaurant, and I wanted to capture something about the dignity of working people, the dreams that sustain us through hardship." The room was quiet as Maya finished speaking, and she realized she'd revealed more about her personal philosophy and emotional core than she'd intended. Catherine was studying her with an expression of genuine interest, as if seeing something she hadn't expected. "That's exactly the kind of authentic voice that creates lasting value," Catherine said finally. Maya, what I'm hearing is someone with not just technical proficiency, but genuine artistic vision. That combination is rare, especially in commercial settings. Vincent leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with how the meeting was progressing. Catherine, what kind of timeline are we discussing for implementation? Catherine pulled out a thick folder and began distributing documents. I've had my legal team prepare a preliminary agreement. The terms we discussed yesterday, Vincent, plus performance bonuses and intellectual property provisions for any original music Maya creates. Maya's hands shook slightly as she reviewed the contract. The salary figures were even more generous than Vincent had indicated, and the health benefits package would eliminate every insurance concern that had kept her awake for months. There were provisions for professional development, including funds for continuing education and master classes with renowned musicians. But beyond the financial benefits, Maya was struck by clauses that treated her as a creative partner rather than just an employee. She would have input into marketing decisions, venue design choices for the Vancouver location, and the overall artistic direction of the music program. Catherine was offering not just employment, but genuine collaboration. The Vancouver location would open in 8 months. Catherine continued. That gives us time to establish the concept at Bella Vista, to refine the operational aspects, and to build an audience base that would support the expansion. Maya, you'd be involved in designing the acoustic elements of the new space, ensuring optimal sound quality for piano performance. Maya tried to absorb the magnitude of what was being offered. This wasn't just about playing piano for restaurant guests, but about creating something entirely new, building a business model that could potentially be replicated in other cities. Catherine was essentially offering her the chance to become a pioneer in a new form of dining entertainment. There's one more element I want to discuss, Catherine said, her tone becoming more serious. Success in this venture will require more than musical ability. You'll be interacting directly with customers, handling requests, managing the social aspects of performance. Are you comfortable with that level of public engagement? Maya thought about her years of restaurant service, her experience reading customer moods and adapting her approach accordingly. I've been working with the public for years. I understand how to gauge audience reactions, how to adjust my performance based on the energy in the room. Vincent nodded in agreement. Maya has excellent people skills. She's one of our most requested servers because customers genuinely enjoy interacting with her. Catherine seemed satisfied with their responses. Then I think we're ready to move forward. Maya, are you prepared to give notice at your other job and commit fully to this opportunity? The question hung in the air, and Maya realized this was the moment of final decision. Everything in her practical nature screamed warnings about leaving steady employment for something unknown. But her artistic soul, awakened after years of dormancy, was singing with possibilities she'd never imagined. Yes, Maya said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. I'm ready to commit fully. Catherine smiled for the first time during the meeting, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Excellent. Vincent, we can finalize the investment terms tomorrow. Maya, I'd like you to start with a performance this Friday evening. Consider it both your debut and our market test. Friday was 3 days away. Maya felt a flutter of panic at the compressed timeline, but also excitement at how quickly her new life would begin. She would need to select repertoire, practice intensively, and prepare mentally for performing in a completely different context than her spontaneous Tuesday evening revelation. Vincent was already thinking operationally. I'll need to adjust our reservations, create marketing materials, brief the staff on how service will work around performance schedules. Catherine gathered her documents. The meeting clearly concluded. Maya, I want you to understand that this is just the beginning. If the Bella Vista program succeeds, we're looking at potential expansion to Portland, Vancouver, possibly San Francisco within 2 years. You could be building something that lasts decades, that becomes part of the cultural landscape of the Pacific Northwest. Maya left the meeting feeling simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. The contract in her briefcase represented more than financial security. It represented the resurrection of dreams she'd thought were permanently buried. As she walked through downtown Seattle, the city looked different, full of possibilities rather than obstacles. She called Jake from the sidewalk outside Catherine's building, unable to wait until she got home to share the news. His excitement was immediate and infectious, his questions about timeline and logistics revealing how invested he'd become in her success. That evening, Maya submitted her resignation at the bakery, her manager's surprise giving way to genuine happiness when Maya explained about the music opportunity. She'd been such a reliable employee that her boss insisted on throwing an impromptu celebration, and Maya found herself surrounded by co-workers who'd never known about her musical background, but were thrilled to learn about this unexpected development. Maya spent her final days at both jobs in a state of surreal transition, completing familiar tasks while her mind raced with plans for her new career. She practiced piano whenever possible, using the silent keyboard app on her phone during breaks, visiting a local music store to play their display models, even convincing a church pianist to let her use their instrument for an hour of practice. Friday arrived with unseasonable sunshine, as if Seattle itself was celebrating Maya's transformation. She arrived at Bella Vista 3 hours before service began, wanting time to familiarize herself thoroughly with the piano, to test acoustics and sightlines, to prepare mentally for what felt like the most important performance of her life. Vincent had transformed the restaurant's ambiance subtly but significantly. The lighting was slightly dimmer, more intimate. Small cards on each table explained the evening's musical program. The piano had been repositioned for optimal visibility and sound distribution. Everything felt different, more theatrical, more special. Maya sat at the piano bench, running her fingers over keys that were becoming familiar friends. She'd chosen her opening program carefully. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 to showcase classical technique, followed by her own jazz arrangement of Autumn Leaves, concluding with an original composition she'd completed just the night before, a piece about transformation and new beginnings. As the dinner hour approached and guests began arriving, Maya felt the familiar pre-performance anxiety that she remembered from her student days. But underneath the nervousness was something else, profound gratitude for the opportunity to reclaim this part of herself, and excitement about sharing music with people who had chosen to spend their evening listening. Catherine Morrison had reserved a table in the front row, her presence both supportive and evaluative. Vincent moved through the restaurant with barely contained energy, his dream of creating something special finally approaching reality. Maya could see other staff members watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to encouragement. At exactly 8 o'clock, Vincent approached the piano and addressed the dining room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Bella Vista is proud to present our new musical director, Maya Chen, in our inaugural live performance evening." Maya rose from the bench and turned toward the audience, seeing faces lit with anticipation and curiosity. She thought about Jake at home, probably lying in his hospital bed imagining this moment. She thought about her parents, about the dreams they'd encouraged when she was young. She thought about all the paths that had led to this moment, all the sacrifices and detours that had somehow brought her exactly where she needed to be. "Thank you for being here tonight," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the intimate space. "Music has always been about sharing stories, about creating connections between people. Tonight I'd like to share some stories with you." Maya returned to the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Chopin's ballad emerged with crystalline clarity, each phrase shaped with years of study and months of renewed practice. But beyond the technical excellence was something else, the joy of a musician who had found her way home, the gratitude of someone who had been given a second chance at her dreams. The music filled Bella Vista with the same magic Maya had discovered 3 nights earlier, but this time it felt different. This wasn't spontaneous revelation but conscious artistry, the beginning of something sustainable and professional and beautiful. As the melody developed and evolved, Maya knew she was no longer just a waitress who could play piano, but a musician who had found her calling. The evening was a triumph that exceeded everyone's expectations. Maya's performance was flawless, her connection with the audience genuine and warm. Guests lingered long after their meals were finished, reluctant to leave the magical atmosphere that live music had created. Catherine Morrison's approval was evident in her expression and her immediate request to discuss expansion timelines. But for Maya, the greatest moment came during her final piece, her original composition about transformation. As the last notes faded into appreciative silence, she saw tears in several audience members' eyes, recognition of something beautiful and authentic in a world that often felt artificial and rushed. The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Maya barely heard it. She was thinking about Jake, about the phone call she would make as soon as she got home, about the future that stretched ahead filled with music and possibility, and the profound satisfaction of work that felt like calling rather than just employment. As the evening wound down and guests gradually departed, Maya sat alone at the piano, running her fingers quietly over the keys. Vincent approached with Catherine Morrison, both of them beaming with success and anticipation. "Maya," Catherine said, "that was everything I hoped it would be and more. You didn't just perform tonight, you created an experience that people will remember and talk about. That's exactly what builds lasting success." Vincent nodded enthusiastically. "The reservations phone has been ringing all evening. Word is already spreading through social media. Maya, you've done something magical here." Maya looked around the restaurant that had been her workplace for 3 years, seeing it now as the launching pad for a completely different life. The journey from waitress to musical director had taken just 1 week, but in many ways it had been building for her entire life. As she packed up her music and prepared to head home to Jake, Maya felt a profound sense of completion and beginning simultaneously. She had reclaimed not just her musical identity, but her faith in the possibility of transformation, the belief that dreams deferred were not necessarily dreams denied. The success of Friday evening led to immediate expansion of the music program. By the following week, Bella Vista was booking performances 4 nights a week, with reservations extending months into the future. Maya's salary increased accordingly, and Jake's medical treatments became not just affordable but comprehensive. Maya left her bakery job and devoted herself completely to music, spending her days practicing, composing and preparing for performances that had become the highlight of Seattle's dining scene. The Vancouver location moved ahead of schedule, with Maya heavily involved in acoustic design and repertoire planning. 6 months later, Maya stood on the stage of the new Vancouver restaurant, looking out at an opening night audience that included critics, investors, and music lovers who had traveled from across the Pacific Northwest. The space had been designed around musical performance, with perfect acoustics and sightlines that created intimacy even in a larger venue. As Maya began her opening night performance, she thought about the waitress who had wiped down tables just months earlier, dreaming of music while serving other people's dinners. That person felt like a character from someone else's story, though Maya carried her gratitude and remembered her struggles. The music that flowed from the piano that night was richer and more confident than ever before, informed by success but grounded in the humility that comes from having lost and regained something precious. Maya had become not just a performer, but a creator of experiences, someone whose artistry could transform ordinary evenings into memorable celebrations. Jake was in the audience, his recovery complete and his pride in his sister evident to everyone around him. He'd become not just Maya's brother but her first and most dedicated fan, attending every performance and helping with logistics and planning. As Maya played her final piece that night, an original composition she'd titled Second Chances, she reflected on the miraculous transformation that had brought her from survival to fulfillment. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Maya's greatest satisfaction came from knowing she had honored both her talent and her responsibilities, finding a way to serve both her artistic soul and her family's practical needs. Catherine Morrison's investment had grown into a small empire of music-focused restaurants, with Maya as the creative director overseeing performers and programs across multiple locations. But success hadn't changed Maya's fundamental understanding of what mattered, the connection between performer and audience, the power of music to transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.